Hello friends, am I audible?
Yes, Rajiv ji, audible.
Thank you so much. Actually, today's class is about Philip Sidney's uh, apology for poetry. Okay, so as we know, this is very important for our NET exam perspective. So Maruti sir will discuss about this and will give us some important points, which is very important for our NET exam. So I request you all, please keep pen paper to write down all the things, because if someone is teaching something, then the person is not only reading. Okay, the person is also researching on the topic. So because the person is not reading a single book, the person is reading a lots of book. Okay, so he or she picking some important points, which is really important because he is researching. Research in the sense reading in several books. Okay, so obviously uh, he is picking some important points. He picked some important points. So write down all the things. This is very important for our next exam. So over to Maruti sir.
Thank you, Rajiv. Okay, let us start the class. We know that Philip Sidney, born in 1554, died in 1586, and died in a battle of a jet plane. He was shot in a thigh, died of infection 26 days later at the age of a 31. Philip Sidney, while lying wounded, he gave his water to another wounded soldier, and saying, "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." Philip Sidney, lying wounded, he gave his water to another wounded soldier, saying, "Thy necessity, necessity, necessity is yet greater than mine." Okay, let's start the topic. Philip Sidney, An Apology for Poetry, also called The Defense of Poesy, written in 1585, published in 1595, was reply to Stephen Gosson pamphlet The School of Abuse. Philip Sidney, An Apology for Poetry, also known The Defense of Poesy, written in 1585, published in 1595, was reply to Stephen Gosson pamphlet The School of Abuse. Stephen Gosson against the idea of poetry. He was the follower of Plato. He was against the idea of poetry. He questioned the morality of poetry. In his essay, Reply to Sidney, Idea of Poetry. Sidney defending the poetry. Stephen Gosson questioned the morality of poetry and form of poetry. Gosson questioned the morality of poetry and form of poetry. According to Stephen Gosson, poetry and other form of literature, poetry and other form of literature, they don't teach you anything. They don't teach you morality. In reply, Sidney says, poetry has been held in high esteem. Poetry has been held in HLD, held in high esteem, ESTEEM, high esteem since the earliest times. It has been the first light given to ignorance. It has been the first light given to ignorance, because all the historian and philosopher, even they are poet. Whatever they do, used to teach other people, they write in poetry form. Whatever they do, used to teach other people, they write in poetry form. Scholar, philosopher, they were poet. Even uncivilized nation among enjoy poetry. The ancient Romans paid high reference. The ancient Romans paid high reference to the poets by calling them creator and a mentor. The ancient Romans paid high reference to the poets by calling them creator and a mentor, which means diviner, prophet. The three kinds of poetry, according to Sidney, are: number one, religious poetry, features modern lesson; number two, philosophical poetry; number third, poetry as an imaginative treatment of life and nature. Poetry as an imaginative treatment of life and nature. Aim of poetry, teach and delight. Teach some moral lesson to audience. Poetry, according to Sydney, is superior to philosophy by its charm, to history by its universality. 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 By its universality, to science by its moral end, to law by its encouragement of human rather than civil goodness. According to Sydney, poetry is superior to philosophy by its charm, to history by its universality, to science by its moral end, to law by its encouragement of human rather than civil goodness. Poetry is superior than other branch including history and philosophy. Poetry is superior than other branch including history and philosophy. Philosophy it gives some theoretical aspect. Philosophy it gives some theoretical aspect and teaches virtue. By giving some theoretical aspect, history teaches you practical virtue. History teaches you practical virtue by drawing great example from life. So poetry is a kind of superior. So poetry is a kind of superior. It has part to move the mind of the reader for the virtue action. Poetry is superior, is a kind of superior. It has part to move the mind of the reader for the virtue action and it present all moral lesson. Superior has part to move the mind of the reader for the virtue action and is present all moral lesson in attractive manner. Action of it present all moral lesson in attractive manner, delightful manner. A common complaint against poetry that is bound up with rhyming and versing. Sydney say poetry is not all about Sydney say poetry is not all about rhyming and versing. They are there to beautify the content. They are there to beautify the content. Polish your speech. Polish your speech. It's give verbal harmony. It's give verbal harmony and give pleasure to content. And give pleasure to content. Help you to memorize the thing. Help you to memorize the thing in versing manner and rhyming form. They add the pleasure to content. Verse is not essential for poetry. Verse is used for convenience. Verse is used for convenience. Stephen Gosson charges on poetry. Number one, poetry is a waste of time. Number two, poetry is a mother of lies. Number third, poetry is nurse to abuse. Number fourth, Plato had rightly banished poets from his ideal world. Once again, I'm repeating that. Stephen Gosson charged on poetry. Number one, poetry is a waste of time. Number two, poetry is a mother of lies. Number three, poetry is nurse to abuse. Number four, Plato had rightly banished poet from his ideal world. So in first point, Sydney says how poetry is a waste of time. How poetry is a waste of time when it teach and delight. How poetry is a waste of time when it teach and delight. Is superior to other branches by science. It is superior to history, superior to philosophy, more fruitful than all other branches of science. How poetry is a waste of time when it teach and delight is superior to other branches. By science, it is superior to history, superior to philosophy, more fruitful than all other branches of science. Second point, poet never from anything. Poet never from anything. All philosopher, historian, they present certain facts. All philosopher, historian, they present certain facts. How should it done and certain how should it not done? How should it done and how should it not done? From second point, Sydney says poetry never form anything. All philosopher, historian, they present certain facts. How should it done and how should it not done? Consider all poet, they do not perform anything. Consider all poet, they do not perform anything. They present something in front of your eyes. They present something in the front of your eyes, and they give you the opportunity, and they give you to opportunity to consider what is right or what is wrong for you, to consider what is right or what is wrong for you. They romanticizing all the thing, they romanticizing all the thing. Third point, poetry is nurse to abuse. Stephen saying that poetry corrupt people, it's make people feminine. Stephen saying that poetry corrupt people, it's make people feminine because it include love theme and all other theme. This theme corrupt the society because it include love theme and all other theme. This theme corrupt the society. Sydney agreed that they are love theme and contemporary poet do including love theme and other theme in modern poetry. Sydney agree that they are love theme and contemporary poet do including love theme and other theme in modern poetry. But Sydney say, but it is not fault of poetry. It is fault of poets. But it is not fault of poetry. It is fault of poets because do not talk about any morality. They do not teach anything. They are talking about this because it is not a fault of poetry. They do not talk about any morality. They do not teach anything. They are talking about this thing in poetry. Love in itself is not that, in inverted comma, love in itself is not that bad. Love in itself is not that bad because it's a kind of aberration. Because it is a kind of aberration. ABBRE aberration. Love in itself is not that bad because it's kind of aberration to the beauty. But using the love theme in the right manner is important thing. But using the love theme in the right manner is the important thing. Again, note this quote. Love in itself is not that bad because it's a kind of aberration to the beauty. But using the love theme the right manner is the important thing that one must know when writing the poetry. It is not the fault of the poetry. That one must know when writing the poetry, it is not the fault of poetry, but fault is the poet. Poetry does not abuse man's wit. Poetry does not abuse man's wit, but it is a man's wit abuse poetry. Note this quote. Poetry does not abuse man's wit, but it is man's wit abuse poetry. Next point, Sydney saying that Plato was not talking about poets only because he was himself was kind of poet. Saying that Plato was not talking about poets only because he was himself was a kind of poet. Most of writing in the verse form, even iron in the verse form, he was not against the poet or poetry. Plato was not against the poet or poetry. He was just against the abuse of poetry. He was just against the abuse of poetry. He talking about the banishing of the abuse of poetry. He talking about the banishing of the abuse of poetry, banishing of all the immoral poets, banishing of all the immoral poets who abuses poetry, not against poetry. According to Sydney, poetry is a speaking picture. Note this point. According to Sydney, poetry is a speaking picture. The purpose of religious poetry is to sing the praise of God. The purpose of religious poetry is to sing the purpose of God, while philosophic poetry contains knowledge of subjects. While philosophic poetry contains knowledge of subjects, and the purpose of true poetry is to delight as well as instruct. And the purpose of true poetry is to delight as well as instruct. Function of tragedy is admiration and commiseration. Function of tragedy, admiration and commiseration. COMMISCRATION. So this is all about Philip Sidney, Apology for Poetry. Over to Rajiv.
Thank you so much. Uh, so basically, some important point I want to, add here. May I? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you are audible.
Actually, I want to add some points here. So, as we know, Apology for Poetry is a literary criticism essay, actually. It's a literary criticism essay written by Philip Sidney, Sir Philip Sidney, okay, in late 16th century, as we know. So, basically, my friends, if I say that the essay, 1 minute, people are joining. Okay. So basically, my friends, if I say the essay, this essay defends poetry against the accusations of being, frivolous. Okay, write down some points I want to, explain. So, accusation of being, frivolous. Not only that, according to Philip Sidney, poetry is an, essential form of art that captures the essence of humanity and the world around us. Am I understandable, guys?
Yes, sir.
I'm adding some important points because I read this and uh, some important points also clicked in my mind, so I just explaining it. Okay. So basically, poetry is an essential form of art, as I said, and that captures the essence of humanity and the world around us. And it provides a way to express communicate our deepest emotions, thoughts, and experiences. So poetry, is not frivolous or useless. It has the power of teach, inspire, and move people to action. It can convey moral and ethical values, shape cultural attitudes, and influence social changes. So one more point: poetry, is not deceitful or manipulative. It is also not a manipulative. Okay, because it is reflection of the poet's sincere intentions and emotions. It uses metaphor and other literary devices to convey complex ideas and emotions that cannot be expressed through simple language. Understand, guys? Please response
Yes.
if I'm
Yes.
very explainable. Okay. So basically, one more thing that we can say, according to Sydney, poetry is not inferior to each other, inferior to other forms actually, inferior to other forms to knowledge or learning. It draws, on a rich tradition of literary and philosophical ideas, as Maruti sir said, literary and philosophical ideas, and can contribute to our understanding of the world in ways that other forms of knowledge cannot. Okay, so basically the true value of poetry, we can say, the true value of poetry lies basically in its ability to create beauty and aesthetic pleasure. Just feel this. It provides a source of enjoyment and entertainment that can enrich our lives and bring joy to our souls. So basically, it is connected with us. Sydney, my friends, Sydney argues that poetry has a divine origin and is therefore deserving of respect and admiration. Admiration. Okay, he refers to the ancient Greek when he was explaining that he refers to the ancient Greek belief that poetry was inspired by the muses, and suggests that poetry has a spiritual dimension that transcends the mundane world. So poetry has a power to stir the imagination and evoke strong emotional responses in readers. Basically, we are readers, right? So it can transport us to different places and times and make us feel as though we are living through the experiences described in the poem. Basically, my friends, when we read a poem, so there are lots of thinking and lots of feelings appears in our mind. Okay, so poetry can be used to explore complex philosophical ideas and challenge established beliefs by using metaphor and the literary devices, or poets can express abstract concept in a way that is accessible and engaging to readers. Whenever reading a literary theory, basically all the critics in literary theory, if you notice that most of the critics basically argued or criticize poetries, because poetry pure form according to all critics. That's why they argue on it. They criticize basically poets and poetries. Poetry is an important tool, actually. Poetry is an important tool for self expression and self discovery. Okay, by writing poetry, individuals can explore their own thoughts and feelings, and gain a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around us and the world around them, actually. So Sydney basically argues that poetry is not only important in its own right, but also as a way of encouraging other forms of creative expression. Okay, by inspiring writers and artists of all kinds of poetry can help to enrich and uh, influence the cultural life of a society. Am I understandable, guys? Did you get me actually, or am
Yes,
I
brother.
boring
Yes.
you?
Great.
No, no.
So I want to share some important questions that UGC may ask, and not only me, also but also Maruti sir will share some questions, and we'll discuss about UGC NET. Okay, so stay here. Do not leave this session. This session will be very interesting. Basically, who wants to appear for UGC NET. Okay. So guys, you know, in this work, basically Philip Sidney's the uh, apology for poetry. If I say that, one question can ask that, what is the main argues of apology of poetry? UGC asked a question that, what is the main argument of apology of poetry? I am asking to all of you. Okay, Let's see how much you got me and Maruti sir. So, what is the main argument of apology poetry? I'm giving you, some options like the poetry is frivolous and unimportant. That poetry is deceitful and manipulative. One more option is, the poet that poetry is essential and valuable. And last one is, suppose that poetry is, inferior to other forms of knowledge. So tell me, which one is right? What do you think? Which one is right? Which one should be right? Tell me. Did you write whatever I said?
Repeat it again, please.
What is the main argument of apology for poetry? Okay, what is the main argument of apology of poetry? So I am giving some options that that poetry is frivolous and unimportant. Second one is that poetry is deceitful and manipulative. That poetry is essential and valuable. That poetry is inferior or inferior to the other forms of knowledge. So tell me, which one should be right here? Which one should be correct? Tell me.
Poetry is essential and valuable.
Please repeat.
Yes, poetry is essential and valuable.
Poetry is essential and valuable.
Yes, right. Definitely right. Essential and valuable. Madhu sir, are you there?
I'm there. I'm listening. I just want to listen
Am I right?
all other students answer. I know the answer, but I'm not giving because I want to listen other students also.
Yes, obviously.
Okay.
Actually, the main
Okay. We
argument,
have to discuss.
yes, yes. Uh, Answer is, here the answer is essential and valuable. So, may I explain why it is the answer? I have already discussed it whenever I was explaining it. Actually, the main argument of apology for poetry is that poetry is essential and valuable. In the essay, Sir Philip Sidney defends, poetry against the accusation, as I said, that it is frivolous, deceitful, and unimportant. Right? He argues that poetry has the power to teach, inspire, and move people to action, and that it is not inferior to other forms to knowledge, learning. Right? So, correct answer is the poetry is essential and valuable. Okay. So over to Maruti sir.
Okay, two questions you have to be added in that. In exam, if they can ask that what is the two things which is important that uh, I think they can ask in how poetry is. They can give the options and ask which is the two aspect in which poetry is superior. So they can give you philosophical, historical. You have to go with that right answer. And in second questions, if they asked about, you have to know that it's not a fault of poetry, it's fault of poet. You have to note this point also. Poetry is not a fault of poetry, it's fault of poet. So this point is very important. They can ask in exam, and this work is very important because in every exam they can ask one question from that. So I want to know all of your experience about this time exam who have given. Anyone who have given exam this time? in March.
Yes.
Yes.
What you feel? Question is understandable or a tough?
No, it is understandable. And this time they have given the direct question.
Can you think that in every exam they can ask three or four uh, three or four questions from George Filbert and Robert Greenberg? It is possible. It is possible that in the upcoming exam they can ask in from Robert Greene and George Filbert, three and four words. It's not possible. So follow the basics. You have to go, but don't go in the depth of every work. Just mug up the point, just mug up the work, mug up the characters. You need to go a depth of each and every point. It's very difficult to go on that. Okay?
Yes.
Definitely.
Because we know we have already seen that the questions come from your series which are not the part of your series. They give the options. The first time saw in exam that questions come from that Robert Greene. Find the three work of Robert Greene. Find the three work of Josh Pill. It not happen in every time. Note this. It's not happen. It's one time. It's happened one time. Next time they will ask from cultural studies. They will ask from postmodernism, archetypal psychoanalysis, structuralism, post-structuralism, historicism, feminism, post-colonial. So you have to be mug up all these points, and we will discuss it. We will discuss this topic daily. That is, you want to say something?
Actually, I want to ask a question. Actually, a question clicked on my mind regarding this work about apology for poetry. So I want to ask to everyone, even to Maruti sir, that suppose yeah, we have already read that study of poetry, right? A study of poetry by Arnold, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So here is the question. Suppose, actually, I am asking to you, all of you, what is the difference between study of poetry and apology for poetry? Can you explain that? I read, Arnold's. I read Arnold's study of poetry. I have already read about apology for poetry, Sydney's work and Arnold's work. So some of you can explain what is the difference between two. Any one of you read Arnold's work, study of poetry? Any one of you?
Yeah, I
No
have
one.
read, and I think there's no difference between them. They're very much similar.
We can say very much similar. You know, Maruti sir. I just want to say the study of poetry, and apology for poetry, are two different things, according to me. The study of poetry, refers to the academic, discipline of analyzing and interpreting poems, right? Including their, form, content, and literary techniques, as we already, read about the touchstone method, right? We all know what is touchstone method, right? So it involves close reading, critical analysis, and an understanding of the historical and cultural context in which the poems were written, right? On the other hand, if I say that apology for poetry by Sydney's work, so is a, this work is a literary work that defends the value of importance of poetry. If I'm saying anything wrong, please interrupt me. I am telling all of you, please, even to Maruti sir. If I'm saying anything wrong, just concentrate whatever I'm saying. Actually, I am differentiate between two. What is the difference between two? Apology for poetry by Sydney's work, and Arnold's work, study of poetry. So I have already explained what is study of poetry. You all already know about this. Okay. So in apology for poetry, you can say that apology for poetry is a literary work that defends the value and importance of poetry. It is it is a work of literary criticism that argues for the place of poetry in human culture and society. While the study of poetry, my friends, just write down what I'm saying. While the study of poetry is concerned with analyzing individual poems, okay, and understanding their literary qualities, apology for poetry is concerned with defending the entire genre of poetry as a form of knowledge expressions. That's all. These are actually the small contents which is may differentiate between study of poetry and apology for poetry. Okay, Mauti sir, am I wrong if I say that?
I also want to add some point in that. In study of poetry, when one reads poetry, it tends to estimate whether it is a verse form or not. This work, I will talk about the three terms. Number one, real estimate. It is an unbiased viewpoint. Real estimate. It is an unbiased viewpoint that takes into account historic context and the creative faculty. Unbiased viewpoint. People
Yes,
hardly
obviously.
use real estimate. Real is comparing current work with the historical context. Look at the words of the poetry. Raise it critic at high pedestal and hinder one from putting a weakness. अगर किसी क्रिटिक के अंदर किसी भी तरह की weakness होती है तो उससे भी कंसल्ट करके रख देता है, उसके पोजीशन को हाई पेडिस्टल पर लाकर खड़ा कर देता है. Historic estimate pleases historical context about the value of art itself. अच्छे क्रिटिक की आदत होती है कि किसी भी वर्क को पढ़ने से पहले पर्सनल बैकग्राउंड को इम्पोर्टेंट देता है. नंबर टू, पर्सनल एस्टिमेट depends on personal taste, like dislike of the critic, and this affects critics' judgment of poetry. You should not confine yourself to the literature of your own country. You should substantially look at the foreign literature and ideas, because the creation of art be an objective endeavor, should be an objective endeavor. Such a stone method, if a poet is truly classic poetry, will give readers real pleasure and enable him to compare and contrast other poets which are not of the same high standard. कोई पोएट क्लासिक है तो रीडर को सही मायने में पोएट्री रियल प्लेजर और पोएट्री को दूसरे पोएट्री से तुलना कर पाएगा जो कि सेम के नहीं होते हैं. Read classics, read class with an open eye and not to fault of classical work, and this enables one to rate poetry with the value. Such stone matters, lines and expression of a great master. It is also used to analyze poetry, and whether poetry is of high standard or not. Borrowed from Longinus. This method was used in England by Joseph Addison. He would have a man read classic works which understood the text style and place, and also those modern works find high praise among contemporary. Okay, over to Rajiv.
Thank you so much for this information, and this is really understandable and really nice that you were explained very well actually. And I want to add, I am agree with you, and I want to add some more points. Like, if I say the study of difference between study of poetry, I've already said some points, and difference between study of poetry and Arnold's work, and with if I differentiate with apology for poetry by Sigmund's work. So if I say that some points like focus, methodology, audiences, authorship, these are all also important, difference point. Uh, as per if I differentiate between those. So one more thing is scope. So let me explain why I am saying this, so that focus is differentiate between those. Why focus? Because the study of poetry, if you read, the study of poetry focuses only, my friends, that individual poems and their literary qualities, as I already said, right? So while apology for poetry, if you read apology for poetry, focuses on the genre of poetry as a whole, and its cultural and social importance. This is, if I say that focus, okay. So focus is the point where we can differentiate between them, okay. So one more I have said that methodology. Why I said methodology? Because study of poetry, if you read that, study of poetry implies various methodologies, guys. If you read the study of poetry, you can find that lots of methodologies, various methodologies, such as close reading, literary analysis, and history, historical, obviously historical and cultural contextualization, right? So in apology for poetry, if you read apology for poetry, so apology for poetry uses argumentation and rhetoric to the defend poetry as a form of knowledge and expression. Just understand what I'm saying. This is very important, and actually you have to understand, because if you read a literary theory or criticism, then differentiate between two works. Suppose I am differentiate between T.S. Eliot and Arnold works. This actually literary theory and criticism is my favorite part. This is also my strong part. I just love to read criticism works, okay. So that's why I am able to explain to you, okay. So basically, my friends, in apology for poetry, methodology I have already explained, focus is already explained. So one more thing, audience. Why I said audience? Audience means the study of poetry is primary emanated. Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So why I said audience? Audience means that study of poetry, is primary, aimed at scholars, literary scholars, right? And students of literature like us, who seek to deepen their understanding of individual poems, traditions. But in apology of poetry is aimed at a broader audience. Just understand, broader audience of readers, and seeks to convince them to the value and importance of poetry as a cultural and social institution, right? One more thing, I have said that authorship. Why I said authorship? Why we can differentiate with authorship between study of poetry and Philip Sidney's apology for poetry? Why we say we should say authorship, right? So this is a point. Authorship, in the sense, I just wanted to say that study of poetry is typically carried out by literary scholars and critics, while apology for poetry, if you say, that was written by Philip Sidney's, a poet, a courtier, and a soldier who lived in the late 16th century, right? So that is authorship. Authorship is not very important, actually. Just I took some a different point. That's why I said authorship. Okay. So one thing is scope. Why I said scope? The study of poetry is a vast field, right, my friends? Vast field that encompasses the many different genres, historical periods, and cultural contexts. While if you read Apology for Poetry by Philip Sidney, so it's a single work of literary criticism that addresses actually the broader question of the value of important of poetry as whole. That is that is some important points which was clicked on my mind. That's why I just explained. Okay, you can write down all the things, and the class is already in recording mode. So link will be shared soon. And over to Maruti sir. If any one of you uh, left some points, then obviously you can listen them again. Over to Maruti sir. Anyways, am I wrong? I mean to say, I explained some points which can differentiate between difference between apology for poetry and Arnold's study of poetry. So, are these points is relevant or not? Please tell me.
Yeah,
Guys,
it's
am I
relevant,
boring?
and so much. And, in this class, whatever the point told by Rajiv ji, and one question I will definitely get from this, very important. This time also from the in, so in you can but you can
सर आपकी
अपना
सर आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही.
hello audible hello
हाँ अब
and
आ रही है.
in Sydney you can left work but cannot left apology for poetry. In the work you have to be if you know the names is enough. But if you do not know in depth of apology for poetry, is very tough for you. So I think whatever the point got to is very important. If you mark this, it's enough for apology for poetry. One for point to note for it to be the important postmodern big
Sir, your voice is
more
not clear.
and hello hello audible
Your voice is breaking, actually.
hello hello
Yes, now you are audible.
hello. Yeah. I'm saying in postmodern a writer have to be mug up that and questions from Graham Greene. This time not they will not ask they didn't ask from that, but I believe in June paper they will definitely go with the Graham Greene because Graham Greene is a favorite writer for a net setters and can ask works like Power and Glory and the Co-American, Man in Havana, you have to be an hard writer. You have to know at least characters and a summary of the work. You get a one question on that. And writer Samuel Beckett, painter, birthday party, caretaker, homecoming, room. They can ask in chronological order. They can ask that what is the first work of Harold Pinter. They will go from Seamus Hanley. Then they can ask from Arnold Bennett, or Wise Hotel, very important work. Then from Minas Park, Time of Men, Jane Body, Kingsley Amis, Lucky Jim, John Osborne, Look Back in Anger. Very important work for net point of view. John Fall, Lieutenant, Collectors, and Johnny Burgess, Thomas Stupert. Very important. So you have to be go in depth of all these writers. Doris Lessing also. C.P. Snow, True Cultures, very important. They can ask it 4 to 5 questions from that. George Meredith, Egoist, published 1979, a very important. Wilkie Collins, Moonstone, and Anthony Trollope. So these are the writers you have to go in postmodern. Are very important. You can go 4 and 5 questions easily. You get from that, and they will ask. I think one writer, William Golding. William Golding, A Lot of Flies, Rites of Passage, Pincher Martin. So okay, you have to mark this. In next class, we will go with another critic, T.S. Eliot, Tradition and Visual Talent. Okay, over to Rajiv.
Thank you so much, Maruti sir. This is really nice. This session is really great. Actually, thank you so much for these works and these suggestions. We will work on it. Okay. So basically, my friends, I want to suggest you something that suppose whatever I said in this session, suppose I explained the difference between these two. So do not go deeper. Okay, because I appeared for an UGC NET exam, and I personally understand and personally experienced that we shouldn't go in deep. Okay, so basically we should read as a summary, as important points. Okay, we have to pick some important points which is very relevant or very important for exam perspective. If you are a PG student or UG student or any suppose you are a academic student, then obviously these are important. Okay, whatever I said in this session, I just explained because of your knowledge or nothing else. Okay, uh, that's all. And do not go, deep, because for NET exam you shouldn't go deep as literature student. And as you know, if you write, if gain knowledge for exam perspective, for your UG or PG exam perspective, then obviously these points are very relevant and you can explain your an exam paper, but do not go deep. Just sum up all the things, just read summaries and take some important points and mug up every day, I must say. And so, just follow whatever Maruti sir said and whatever Rahul sir said. Okay, so that's all, and thank you so much everyone for joining this session. I hope this session was very nice for you, and me and Maruti sir also understandable to all of you. Uh, if you want to say anything on this, please unmute yourself and tell us for better.
Thank you so much, sir, for the information.